Hello, I am Justice here for Judgment Gaming, and I am here today to talk about the balance changes that were announced yesterday for Hearthstone. In case you haven't heard, there's actually a few cards that are going to receive some changes in the next patch, including some that really we've been waiting a long time to see them get hit, and then one that's actually pretty recent. So we are going to just go ahead and dive right into these changes and kind of how I feel about them and what I think they're going to mean for the game moving forward. The first one, and I'm going to start here because I think this is the simplest, is Bone Mare. It's going to go from 7 mana to 8. I think this change is fine. As I said, it's straightforward. It's simple. I think it's a good nerf. The card is still going to be playable at 8 mana, but it's not going to be as incredibly strong as it was before. This is relevant, obviously, largely for constructed play, but also for arena players as well. It gives you one more turn to try to set up to deal with their Bone Mare turn, because, again, the way you really want to deal with it is clear their board before they can drop Bone Mare. So whereas before it was clear their board before turn 7 or before turn 6 if they had the coin, you have an extra turn now to really try to execute your game plan before the 9/9 of stats plus taunt comes down on the board. So again, I think this is a good nerf. The card is still going to be good, but you will have to think a little bit more about what your deck is trying to accomplish before just automatically jamming 2 in there. So again, elegant, I think it's fine. So we're going to move on now to something a little more meta-defining, which is funny because of how popular Bone Mare is. We're going to talk about Raza the Chained. The Highlander Priest has been, I don't know if I want to say a problem, but it has been the best deck in the game for a while now. And a large part of the reason for that is the interaction between Raza the Chained and Shadow Reaper Anduin, where people can just put out silly amounts of damage. And if you don't believe me, go back and watch the match between Surrender and Frozen from the Hearthstone World Championships that just concluded, where you will see just absurd amounts of damage. Fantastic play by Surrender, don't get me wrong, not taking anything away from him, but the deck is capable of some silly things when its hero power costs 0. So now the Raza's effect is going to change, that instead of making the hero power cost 0, the hero power is going to cost 1. So it is still going to upgrade your hero power, whether or not you're using it with Shadow Reaper Anduin. It will still allow for Anduin to put out a fair bit of damage, but it's now not just a free 2 damage every time you play a card or at the beginning of your turn. Once you played Raza and Anduin, you will still have to think about utilizing your mana effectively, rather than every card I play is 2 damage. So I think the deck still has some power to it, but it will probably have to play more of a long game sort of controlling style rather than its current draw my deck and combo you out, from 40 life if I have to. It will still be capable of some large amounts of damage, so I think there will be times where it will be able to do that. But now you'll have to think about, for example, the Velen Mind Blast combo. You're only getting 1 hero power in there, not 2, so that's 4 less damage on that combo. It's still a lot of damage, but it's not as crazy. So it's going to help right away. And also, even though Raza is going to be rotating out of Standard soon, I think this is a very important change for the players that enjoy the Wild format, because Highlander Priest is probably even better in Wild than it is in Standard. And it's important to make sure that this deck is not just the I stop everything you do and then combo you for 40 plus damage no matter what every game deck, for the rest of time in Wild. So it's a change that I'm a fan of. I think it maintains some of the idea of what they wanted Raza to be, while understanding that, okay, its combination with Anduin as is a little bit too powerful. So I think this is a good one. Now we're going to go on to everyone's favorite Buccaneer, Patches the Pirate. when you talk about meta defining, I think few cards actually approach the level that Patches has shaped Hearthstone around it. You will see many decks, including just a couple of pirates, just to take advantage of Patches. I think that when he was originally printed, they knew he was going to be good. I don't think the developers realized quite how good, and you'll hear me say that once more later on in this video. But again, Patches has warped the game around him. The thing is that his effect was fairly straightforward. You summon a pirate, he comes out of the deck, he's 1/1 with charge. So figuring out how to nerf that card, and clearly it needed a nerf, but figuring out how to nerf it effectively, because its effect is so straightforward, it's actually not as easy as it sounds, and it's probably why we've seen them take so long to get to this point of deciding what they want to do with it. So they went the direction of removing charge. So it still gets summoned from your deck when you summon a pirate, but it does not have charge, so I don't know who's in charge now, but I guess it's not Patches. So he does still provide an extra body on the board, essentially for free. It's just a free 1/1. But losing charge is actually a big hit to the overall power of the card. It's a big deal, honestly. It does drastically affect just how strong Patches is. Not only in terms of, when summoning a 1/1 from the deck with or without charge, but it's now even worse to draw Patches than it was before. Because the way he's been, if you draw him, he's a Stone Tusk Boar, which, unless you're playing Quest Rogue, is not a card you're ever going to include in your deck. It's not a strong card. So already drawing Patches felt really bad. Now it's going to feel even worse, because essentially he becomes an inferior version of Wisp or Snowflipper Penguin, which is awful, because again, those cards see basically no play. Those are 0 mana 1/1s with no effect, and if you draw him, he now becomes a 1 mana 1/1 with no effect. So drawing Patches after the nerf is going to feel terrible. And even not drawing him, again, he does lose a lot of power. I'll be honest, I don't expect Patches is going to see a lot of play after this change. I might be wrong. It is still just adding a free 1/1 to the board. You summon whatever pirate and you get a free 1/1. Cool. It's not the kind of card where now decks are going to go out of their way to include pirates to make sure they can summon Patches, which is fine. That is not a problem. It's pretty debatable, and in fact I think a lot of people would say that it was bad that decks felt the need to include 2 or 3 pirates when they otherwise wouldn't, just to get Patches. So I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm saying I don't think decks are going to do it anymore. I don't think a 1/1 without charge is going to be worth changing the way you construct your deck a little bit to get it. I might be wrong. It's still putting stats on the board essentially for free. Again, drawing it is super terrible without charge. It was bad with charge. It's so bad without charge. Patches might still see some play, but I think it's going to be a whole lot less. I did see one interesting suggestion online where someone suggested to kind of get around that issue of giving it its effect of Battle Cry, this minion gains charge. So that if you're summoning it from the deck, it does not have charge, so it's the nerf that they want. But if it's in hand, it's the same as it is now. It's a Stone Tusk Boar. I actually like that. I think that makes sense. So you're still getting the nerf, you're not getting the charge from the deck, but if you draw it in hand, it's not as terrible. It's still not great. I like that. It's not happening. That's not the way they're going about it, and because of that, I think the card just won't see play. I don't know if giving it the Battle Cry of charge would make it see more play than it otherwise will once the nerf goes through, but it's at least something to preserve the card a little bit and not just totally gut it. As I say that, watch me be wrong, and patches will still say a ton of play in Wild after it rotates. You never know for sure. But this does seem to hit the card very hard. So, speaking of hitting cards very hard, we're going to go to everyone's favorite 0-mana 5/5, Card or Creeper. It has been changed now to change the attack from 5 to 2. So, before I get into this, I'm going to give what is probably an unpopular opinion. I will say I agree the card needed to be nerfed. It was too strong. But I think it served an important role in this metagame and shouldn't have been hit this hard. The reason that I say that is it is one of the, I don't know if I'm going to say one of the only tools or one of the most effective tools that aggressive or tempo-oriented decks have right now to deal with things like Control Warlock, or even to some extent with Priest. And that tool is getting removed. When you're playing these types of decks, Warlock wrecks you, honestly. But what you have to deal with is that, okay, they hellfired away my board of a few guys, now I can drop a 5/5 that they might not be able to deal with right away. So I at least have a way of trying to fight for the board before that Void Lord comes down. They are removing that tool. Because a 2/5 does not do that. It just doesn't. I think this card is also being completely gutted. I don't see any reason to play Card or Creeper as a 2/5. Again, I might be wrong. I am the first one to tell you that. But 2 or 3 mana 2/5 is okay. Well, Carrion Grub has existed, at least Hunter is a 3 mana 2/5, and outside of very specific circumstances in a very specific metagame for a very short amount of time, Carrion Grub really has not seen play. Now you might argue, well, what about a 0-mana 2/5? Yeah, 0-mana 2/5 is cool. It's decent value. But is that worth taking up the deck slot for the times where it might be a 2 or 3 or 4 mana 2/5? And maybe I could have something that's better, in my aggressive deck or in my tempo deck. A 2/5 does not accomplish the things that a 5/5 does. Not even close. I mean, obviously, it is a huge nerf. So personally, and again, this is where I might have an unpopular opinion. You guys might completely disagree, and that's okay if you do. I would have rather just see the mana cost go up to 8 or even to 9. Honestly, maybe even 9 is right. I think that would have been a better solution. It leaves the card in a situation where it's playable, but not consistently being dropped on, say, turn 2 or turn 3. Maybe I can, play a 4 mana 5/5. Still pretty good value, still lets me get a 5/5 on the board before, say, a Void Lord comes out. But, it's still a real minion. A 2/5 is pretty meh. A 5/5 is still a pretty beefy minion. So, whereas we're seeing, those 0-mana 5/5s to 1-mana 5/5s, well, if you raise the mana cost by 2, now you're talking about best case scenario, now you're talking about 2, 3, 4-mana 5/5s. It's still a strong card. I'm not saying, the card is totally balanced, totally fine, no complaints at all should be made. It'd still be a strong card, but not as overpowered as it is now, but still playable and still accomplishing the things that it's supposed to accomplish. Yeah, sometimes it feels bad, like in an aggro mirror where it's whoever started with 1 or 2 card or creepers in their hand probably wins. Yeah, that feels bad. I agree. But the flip side of that, as I said, it is an important tool in a metagame right now where there are those just walls like Void Lord, where you need, as the aggro deck, you need to have some chance of dealing with it. Yes, that deck is supposed to beat aggro, but it's doing that now. With current Card or Creeper, Control Warlock is still supposed to beat aggro. So I don't think nerfing it, to that, will completely change things, but it at least gives aggro fighting chance. Because I don't think just because your deck is unfavored in a matchup, I don't think that should mean that you have no shot at winning. You know, there are very few exceptions to that rule. Old school Freeze Mage versus old school Control Warrior, for example. Yeah, there's almost never a time where the Freeze Mage should have won. That was just a bad matchup. But I'm not talking about specific one deck archetype. I'm talking about, you know, overall style of deck. You know, whether it be an aggro paladin or a temple rogue or whatever, having access to Corridor Creeper gave you some way to try to have a chance in a matchup that you're still unfavored in. Nerfing it to a 2/5 just takes that away. So I said I would like to see the mana cost raise. I said maybe to 8 isn't enough. I think 9 maybe would have been fine. Raise it by 2, because yeah, there's definitely games where that card is coming out too early. There is the fact that, you know, sometimes you draw it late and then it's a 7 mana 5/5 or a 6 mana 5/5 and then it's, you know, iffy, and raising it to 9 means if you're playing it for its natural mana cost, it's probably taking your whole turn, and that's not good. But I would rather see that. So I know I'm just rambling on kind of about the same point. This is the only change on here that I actually really don't like. I think patches could be handled a little bit differently, but I also think he's kind of had his time in the sun. Let him just be a vanilla 1/1 for a while. It's okay. This change to Corridor Creeper I actually really don't like. Again, I might be wrong. Maybe a 1 or 2 mana, you know, 2/5 is still good enough. You know, maybe I'm wrong. But in the situations where it's really good right now, it stops being good with 2 attack. So I would have rather just see, as I said, maybe a 9 mana cost. You know, raise it from 7 to 9. I think would have been what I'd prefer to see personally. But moving on, I've spent more than enough time talking about Corridor Creeper. The last thing I want to talk about is something that I kind of alluded to a lot in the last segment, which is Warlock. Because right now, the top 2 decks in the game are Highlander Priest and Control/Cube Warlock. Yes, those are 2 different decks, but they actually share a lot of the same cards. So we're going to kind of lump those 2 together. Those are the top 2 decks. So if you look at, say, the World Championships, basically what people are playing were Highlander Priest, some version of Controller Cube Warlock, and decks that they hope have a chance against those decks. They're definitely the best 2. With these changes, Highlander Priest I think will still be okay, but it's not going to be as crazy as it is now, which means Warlock is probably just going to be uncontested #1 deck in the game. And honestly, the way things have been going, it is a bit surprising that there's no nerfs/balance changes to Warlock included here. I think, to me, it looks pretty clear that Void Lord is a little bit more powerful than Team 5 anticipated. It's a very frustrating card to play against, which is something that they claim to want to avoid. So yeah, I'm a little surprised Warlock didn't receive any balance changes. I am a little bit concerned about how strong it's going to be now that we're taking away Highlander Priest as being as good. Again, I still think the deck's going to be okay. I think Highlander Priest will not crumble and die. But Warlock does look to be the uncontested #1 deck. Now, there is a flip side to that, because being the uncontested #1 deck is a double-edged sword. And it might be part of the reason why it might not be as bad as some people think. Because when you are the #1 deck, without a doubt, it becomes easier to target you. Because part of the problem right now is people trying to play a deck that can deal both with Highlander Priest and with Warlock. If Priest drops in popularity/power level, you don't need to try to find that balance as much. You can target Warlock more than you can now. So because people can really hone in on that and say, I am going to beat Warlock with this deck, and you can do that without being punished as heavily for not considering Highlander Priest, it actually may not lead to as much of a rise in power for Warlock as some people are thinking. With that said, I still think the deck's going to be very good, obviously, because it's very good now and isn't receiving any nerfs, so of course it's still going to be good. But you're probably going to see, both on ladder and especially in tournaments, people targeting Warlock more. If you looked at the World Championships, Warlock was banned a lot. People do not want to play against it. But on ladder, of course, you have no bans. So now I expect once these balance changes go through, people are going to construct decks that are targeting Warlock specifically that much more compared to where they are now. So those are my thoughts on the balance changes. Overall, I'm a fan. I think it addresses a lot of the problems in the current metagame. I said I have my own personal problems with the Carter Creeper nerf, but I do agree that the card did need to get hit. So I think the cards that they chose to hit were very good choices. We'll see what happens with them leaving Warlock alone for a while. We'll see where that goes. But overall, definitely good to see Team 5 noticing some of the problems in the game, listening to the community about the cards that they really don't want to have to play against, both in Standard and in Wild, and Arena as well, and really taking action against it. So that's it for me. I do want to hear what you guys think. Definitely feel free to leave a comment on the video here, or get in touch with me through social media. I'm always happy to interact with you there as well. So that will do it. Thank you guys for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.